What is the creepiest thing that has ever actually happened to you? Story number 1. Years ago, I was on a cross-country trip, solo, to a family reunion. I was supposed to make it to a friend's house, but there was horrible weather and it was slow moving. Then a terrible accident happened just ahead of me, and I was stuck for quite a while. All told, I was 5 hours behind schedule. I was exhausted and in need of a bathroom and a shower, so I pulled into a little strip motel off a fairly backroad state road. It was obviously small and dirty, but would work in a pinch. There was a window to the outside where check-in was. The guy there eyed me up, then a college-aged girl asked me if I was traveling alone. I went to hand him my ID and credit card, but he insisted on cash only. Red flags were going off at this point, but I scrounged together just enough cash and he tossed me the key. The room was dirty, barely bigger than the bed. The first thing I did was go to the bathroom, then I flipped up the mattress. Dirty. Signs of bedbugs. A moment later, I saw a cockroach as well. That was it. I was out. I decided I would use the parking space at least and sleep in the back trunk hatch of my SUV. I curled up, using a suitcase for a pillow and random clothes for a blanket, and fell asleep for an hour. I woke up aware of someone talking on a phone outside. It was now around 3 a.m. He finished up his call and walked quietly over to my room, unlocked the door and walked in. The lights didn't turn on, and a minute or two later he came back out, slamming the door behind him and cursing, with another guy. I hadn't seen Guy 2 enter, so I still don't know where he came from. They angrily talked for a moment, then the check-in guy walked over to my SUV. I covered up my head quickly with a shirt. After he tried to lock the door, he peered in the back seat. But between my tinted windows and blending into the general mess, he didn't notice me in the hatch. The two guys walked away to the far side of the lot, talking more. The one gesturing across the street where a diner was. While they were distracted, I climbed up to the front seat and started up my SUV. They turned around in surprise as I pulled away. I called my friends back home and told them, but didn't want to worry my family, so I said nothing to them. When I got back home some 3 weeks later, we figured out the name of the hotel thanks to Google Maps and called the local police. They told me the place had closed down only days before I called. Edit. Frequent question stuff. This was about a decade ago and took place along 250, I believe, in Virginia. The place name was Mountaintop or Mountainside Motel. It was a single-story building with a check-in window in the middle, tiny diner across the street, and no other businesses nearby. My logic was that it was smarter than parking by the side of the road. The police took my info and never called me back. Never found anything from my web searches immediately afterward. At least one friend thought I misunderstood the situation and there was a logical reason. Motherfucker. The stories that freak me out the most on these threads always include real people. Ghosts I can deal with. People are terrifying. Story 2. It was my senior year of high school. On a warm May evening, I was getting ready for bed when I heard yelling coming from outside. I ignored it until I finally crawled into bed. It wasn't long after I closed my eyes that I heard, "I wanna fuck you," through my open bedroom window. I was confused, so I got up and looked out my window. There was my neighbor standing at the fence that divided our yards, looking up at my open window. I was pretty freaked out, and I contemplated whether or not I should tell my parents. But it was dark and I didn't know whether or not my neighbor was yelling at me or at someone else that I couldn't see. I didn't know him very well. We had never spoken before. I didn't think there was any real reason to make a fuss over it. The next morning I was home alone, getting ready for school. I see my neighbor putzing around in his yard, and we make awkward eye contact through my living room window. I didn't think anything of it. Close to 8:30 that morning, I heard my dog in our backyard barking, and it started to sound vicious. As I'm in the bathroom, I can hear the back door open. I casually thought, it's just Mom. But in the back of my mind, I had a strange feeling it was my neighbor. My gut feeling was right. To this day, I am so thankful that I had listened to that small voice in the back of my head. We met up in the kitchen. There he was, standing 5 or 6 feet from me, with an 8-inch kitchen knife in his hand. I'll never forget the look on his face. He looked afraid, almost as if he didn't want to go through with what he was going to do. At the same time, he had this crazy look of lust in his eyes. He said, "Don't move." The only thought going through my head was, if you want to live, run, now. You know when you have those nightmares where someone is chasing after you, but your body just feels really heavy? That's how my body felt at exactly that moment. I wanted to faint, and I'm so glad that it didn't. As I ran out of the house, I remembered screaming, "No, no, no." I fell down the front stairs leading up to our porch, got up, and must have knocked on 2 or 3 different houses before someone finally answered their door. My town's entire police force showed up. The guy ended up going back to his house. I guess he was an unsuccessful recovering alcoholic and had drank 2 liters of vodka the night before. He admitted to the police that he had been watching me through my bedroom window for months. When the police searched his home, They found photos of me that he had taken that explained in explicit detail what he wanted to do to me. Holy shit. Story 3. I was just browsing this thread when I remembered the most creepy thing ever, with photographic proof. I was catching the last train back from London and had about an hour to kill at a station where I needed to change. It was late at night. I was on my own, and the station didn't have many people in it. I decided this was a great time to have a little wander around the platforms, stretch my legs a tad, and enjoy the wait. I ended up walking down a platform with no more scheduled journeys for the night, so naturally there were very few of us there. Actually, there were just 2 of us, me and a little girl. It's quite unusual to see a little girl standing on her own in the dead of night, and I'm not sure if I did the right thing or not, but I stopped walking, parked myself on a bench about 20 meters away. I decided to subtly keep an eye on her to make sure she was okay. At first, I assumed her mother had probably gone to the toilet or something and asked her to stand in the same place until her return, but children shouldn't be on their own like that. So I sat there and decided to be a temporary guardian for her. This girl was standing down the platform and appeared to be about 10 years old or so, in her school uniform. From what I could tell, she was Asian and seemed pretty confident standing where she was. Very, very still. Because after 5 minutes passed, this little girl was still standing in exactly the same position that she was in before. I mean, I hadn't seen her move an inch. I sat there on the bench, thinking about what could have happened. Had her mother told her to stand there and then abandon her? Had she been separated from her carer? Maybe I should wait a bit longer. And she just stood there, in the same position. Right arm clutched her body, staring directly at me. 10 minutes passed. 15. It was winter and the platforms were cold. This little girl must have been absolutely freezing, but she was just standing there, staring at me. I could feel her eyes burning into my soul. Was she angry? Was I hallucinating? I considered going to find out, but then a cleaner walked past her. He didn't even look at her. He just swept past and skipped on his merry way. He wouldn't just let a child stand there, right? Was she a ghost? If I got up to get help, then I would have to take my eyes off the girl. And then what if she ran away? What if some creep snatched her? No, her safety was important. 20 minutes. It was getting ridiculous. This poor little girl had been abandoned or something. I decided that when 25 minutes passed, if nothing had happened, I'd hop up and go ask her if she was okay. I don't know why I didn't do so sooner, but I was hoping her parents would come to collect her or something. As long as I kept a lookout for the girl, everything would be okay. 22 minutes passed. She was still standing there, staring at me from a distance. I needed to take a picture and send it to someone to make sure I wasn't seeing things, like a sleepy hallucination or a psychotic break or something, because this apparently invisible ghost demon child is just standing there casually glaring in my direction. I shit you not. Here's what came out of my phone's camera. I sent it to my boyfriend at the time for confirmation. No, I wasn't seeing things. I wasn't dreaming. I needed to go help her. And 25 minutes later, she was still standing there, dead still, staring at me in the freezing cold, in the dead of night. Just me and her, here on this dark and creepy platform. I stood up and tentatively walked towards her. I got a bit closer and she stood there, remaining still. Now as I got closer, it was probably the most, oh my god, moment I've ever experienced. I saw her face, the shadows hitting under the dim station lights. It looked half melted, like she had no real eyes. My heart was pumping faster and faster and faster. I couldn't stop now. This poor girl was probably a victim of a horrific accident, definitely not a demon. Just because she stood so still for so long in the cold weather and stared at me. Well, I guess maybe she didn't stare at me, she didn't have eyes. Wait, if she's actually a ghost, is this my last moment on this planet? No, don't be stupid. She's just a poor little girl. I was scared, I admit, but I knew that this girl with a melted face needed someone's help. I needed to go ask her if she was okay. Besides, what kind of person would I be if I just left her there? And as I got closer, it just became more clear. She was deformed, abandoned, a poor little girl. But I couldn't help being scared, but I powered through. I walked up closer to her and opened my mouth to ask her something, trembling. I couldn't believe what I saw. She was made of Lego. She was a goddamn art installation made of Lego. Just standing there, being creepy, staring at people. And it is made of Lego. Dude, that looks creepy as hell even up close. Why the fuck would they put that there? Story 4. Went to a bar about 20 minutes from my apartment in Brooklyn. Because of construction, because I didn't know the way home, I'd lived there for about a month. It took some time to get home. When I got there, I noticed I had a Facebook message from someone I didn't know. Checked it and it was some guy saying, "Nice apartment. Can I come in?" I looked outside and there was some guy who had followed me home. I hadn't given my friends my new address yet, and he may have gotten my Facebook from a friend at the bar. I bolted the door and blocked him. The fact that he followed me and just randomly texted me rather than talk to me at the bar was unnerving. Story 5. Former Air Force here. I was a munition systems technician and I worked in a very large storage facility called a bomb dump in Europe. This place had dozens of buildings, including many earth-covered magazines called igloos, housing thousands of bombs. This facility was pretty big. It was about 9 square miles, I think. An interesting thing about this bomb dump was that it was completely forested and populated with wildlife. Most are deforested because of the fire hazard, but the country that this bomb dump was in required that the area be maintained as a natural preserve. Now, despite having a small deer population, this forest wasn't nice and clear. Most forests have a fire or two to clear them out every 20 years or so. This forest had played host to munition storage since World War II, and had no fires since. It was thick, dark, and dank. The trees were so overgrown that you would be hard-pressed to see 10 yards in a straight line. Anyway, it was a pretty creepy place at night. Hell, it was pretty creepy in the daytime. Twice a day we had to run a security check to make sure that no holes had been cut through the fence, and that all the buildings were closed and locked. However, this wasn't the job of the swing shifters. We were a skeleton crew. The checks were run by the morning and afternoon crews, unless of course they fucked up, which they did one afternoon. The one guy in control doesn't realize that no PM security check was run until about 1 a.m. Since no one is working dispatch, he just walks down to the hall to our office and asks us to run it. We had finished all of our work early, so we were playing split-screen Halo, which was new at the time. Me and my friend Brian volunteered to take a truck out and run the check. We grabbed a walkie-talkie and a flashlight and headed out. First, we run the perimeter. It's about an 11 or 12 mile trip, but we have to go about 15 miles per hour tops, so it takes quite a while. When we started building checks, it was about 2 a.m. We began at the back. I can't remember how it went now, but we had an efficient system for checking every building without having to double back. Anyway, we started as far back from our building and coworkers as possible. Well, Brian decides that a piss and a cigarette are in order before we begin the building check, which would take us another hour or so. He shuts the truck off, drops the tailgate, and we just sit and chill in utter darkness while he burns down his cig. To this day, I don't know why he shut that ignition off. When we hopped back in and tried to start the truck again, nothing happened. The ignition simply didn't fire. No attempted turnover. No sputter and fail, just silence. It must have been an electrical problem. Well, fuck. We both thought about it and said it simultaneously. Control, this is Storage 1. We're broken down out here. Silence. Control, we're out past Building 70. We need a ride. You copy? Silence. We tried the walkie-talkie for a good 15 minutes before we realized that we would be walking back. Now, we could have stuck to the road. There were no streetlights, but at least we would know where we were going. We would have had to walk about a mile northward to the main corridor, then turn east for another 3 miles. Not too bad, but for some reason we thought it would be much faster to take a shortcut through the forest. I actually knew this was a shitty idea, but I had a man car to preserve, so I went along with the idea. No matter what logical idea I came up with for sticking to the road, it always sounded like I'm a giant pussy when I said it in my head. So I trudged out into the woods with Brian. You'd think that Brian had balls of steel. You'd think that he would shrug off any spooky shit just to save some face. This was all his testosterone-laden idea anyway, after all. Well, this wasn't so. Brian was scared shitless about 10 minutes in. Now, I wasn't too scared. I knew it was a bad idea, but I wasn't about to lose it or anything. However, Brian's anxiety was strong and I could sense it. And worst of all, it was getting increasingly contagious. Walking through thick woods is slow. Neither of us had watches on, and our cell phones were back in our lockers. Before, we just went off of the clock in the truck. But that truck was a quarter mile away now, so we had no real idea what time it was. But we were too far into the woods to go back. I knew that we weren't going in a straight line. We were meandering about. But I did know that we should have almost been to one of the rows of buildings. It was probably about 20 minutes since we had left the truck, but it might as well have been hours since we reached the row of buildings. These were old buildings, above-ground brick structures, not the concrete igloos. The above-ground magazines had specially designed roofs that would blow upward in the event of a catastrophic explosion, minimizing damage to nearby structures. There were also some of the oldest buildings in the bomb dump, a little newer than World War II itself. They were ramshacked, rusted, and coated in moss. Inside they were dank and moldy. The only thing we kept in them were plain Mk-82 bomb bodies, the least expensive and least sensitive stock that we had. The only saving grace about these buildings was the dim industrial lights over their doorways. While not ideal, the soft orange glow was a welcome break from our flashlight. We started walking down the gravel road that these buildings lined. We passed one, then another, and another. Then, holy fucking shit, Joe, one of the buildings was open. The big steel blast doors were sealed, but the side door for personnel to use was propped open with a fucking rock. Control, this is Storage 1. Building 62 is not secure. Silence. Did you get that, Control? Building 62 is open. Silence. I looked at Brian. You know we have to check this out, right? Though it was too dark to tell, I'm pretty sure Brian went a little pale. Yep. We approached the door like Osama bin Laden was going to jump out with a fucking scimitar and gut us. After all, we didn't have weapons on us. I stuck my head in. Hello? I felt a chill roll over me as I entered. Brian followed. It stunk in the building. It smelled like wet concrete and mildew. I shined the flashlight down a row of bombs. There were hundreds in there. When I was satisfied, we headed back to the doorway. We didn't have the keys to lock it up, but at least we could say that it was secure. That's when I heard it. The most blood-curdling scream I had ever heard. My heart went into my fucking throat. Brian just ran. I just followed him. We ran all the way out of the building, across the road, and into the trees across. What the fuck? Brian was shaking. I'm pretty sure that I was too. I'm not sure how I got out of breath. We only ran about 20 yards from the building, but it felt like I had just run a fucking marathon. I hunkered down, resting my palms on my knees. What the fuck was that? It sounded like a fucking banshee, man, Brian said. Then my heart sank. Oh, Jesus. We left the door open. Just fuck it. Dude, we can't. We already called it in. We'd be fucked. For the next minute, or 10, we just sat there panting, watching the door. Whatever was in there, it seemed to have no interest in following us out. Brian and I looked at each other and knew that we had to go shut the door. We both began walking up to it slowly. I was careful not to shine the flashlight into the door. I didn't want to get the attention of whatever was in there. We paused about 3 feet from the door. We'll just shut it, dude. And we did. I slid the rock away with my foot, and Brian gently closed the door. Not another noise came from Building 62. Control, Building 62 is now closed, but it's still unlocked. Copy that? Now you might be thinking, wow, that must have been pretty creepy. Nice one. But I'm not done. The night got even more fucked up. You'd think we'd stick to the road after the run-in with a fucking hell banshee scream, but things don't always pan out the way you want. We started up the gravel road towards the central corridor, passing more of the old brick magazines. We had about half a mile to go now, when there was another scream. We froze. It came from right up the road, just ahead of us. It came again. It was the most horrid, heart-rending sound I've ever witnessed in person. I shined my flashlight about, but there was nothing but pitch black and dense foliage. Hey man, if we go this way, the missile shop is pretty close. Brian pointed off into the forest. He was right too. The missile shop was a small office attached to a work bay, where missiles were pulled from storage and inspected. Of course, no one would be there to let us in, but there was a patio and it was well lit with flood lamps. I weighed the options in my head, cut another quarter-mile through the forest, which wasn't so bad the first time after all, and have a nice, well-lit place to relax until Control finally got our message, or we could keep walking towards the scream, and have another several miles of pitch-black road until we got back to the main office. Yeah, let's go, I said, feeling somewhat bold and chicken shit at the same time, and once again we were back trudging through the woods, the source of the screams getting further behind us. About 5 minutes into the brush, we realized this patch was much thicker than the first one. This shit was machete-worthy rotten underbrush. We were working our way through, starting to become quite anxious, when we came to a small opening, about shoulder width and clear of debris. It was a way through. Instinctively, we began following it. The path widened more and more until we were in a small clearing. I could now faintly see the floodlights through the heavy brush ahead. Look, there it is, I said, pointing. Speaking was the wrong thing to do. At this very moment, a set of eyes appeared about 20 feet in front of us. Big, giant yellow eyes gleaming in my flashlight. I sensed more movement around us. I twitched the flashlight to and fro. Eyes. Everywhere. Big fucking yellow eyes gleaming in my flashlight. We were literally surrounded. I couldn't breathe. Brian made no sound. We just froze in terror. We watched, utterly horrified, as a bunch of goddamn deer rose from their resting spots and passively trotted away. I gasped. Deer. It's just fucking deer. We both began howling with laughter. Moments later, we were through the brush, and Brian was smoking another cigarette in the missile shop patio. He looked at me and says, "Don't tell anyone, but I was scared fucking shitless back there." I was too, man. After some deliberation, we decided that the blood-curdling screams must have been some kind of bird. In hindsight, I'm almost positive it was a barn owl. The combination of trudging through pitch-black woods and hearing the screams had primed us for sheer terror by the time we stumbled on the herd of deer. Normally deer feed at night, but it was one of those especially dark moonless nights where even they decided it's too creepy to go out for a nibble. Once we had laughed off the fact that we were huge pussies, we walked the rest of the way back to our office. The one dude in control was playing Halo with the others. His walkie-talkie was down the hall in his office. Story 6. I went on a guided cemetery tour at night. About 6 or 7 of us were standing around a tomb, listening to the story of how the inhabitant had killed himself with a gun, when all of a sudden there was a big flash, and the whole sky lit up green with smaller flashes. We found out later that we had witnessed a meteor break up, so the tour guide takes a moment, recovers from the surprise, and continues his story about how some decades after the poor chap had killed himself, someone broke into his tomb and stole his skull. We then moved on and walked further into the cemetery when we were startled by a loud bang. We shrugged it off as a car backfiring, laughed nervously at how on edge we were, and continued the tour. Shortly after, we hear a couple more bangs in quick succession. And one of the tour party commented that they were pretty sure they were gunshots. There was another bang, closer. Definitely a gunshot. Then we saw a light in between some of the headstones, and I kid you not, we saw the figure of a man carrying a shotgun, slowly coming from the direction of the tomb we had just been at. We froze. I looked over to the tour guide, thinking it was some kind of prank he plays on all his customers, but he was completely white and was backing away. It was a man with a shotgun and he was walking towards us. He lifted a flashlight and pointed it directly at us. Several of us ducked behind the headstones as he yelled, "Get out of here! What the hell are you doing in this place?" Turns out the city council paid some guy to shoot possums in the cemetery and they forgot to warn the tour company. Story 7. On a spring break trip, a friend and I got dropped off at the front gate of our condo. The security guard saw us and kept insisting on walking us up to the room. We kept saying no and he seemed kind of weird. He followed us into the elevator and I stood as close as I could to the buttons. He kept making weird comments and telling us how hot we were. We kept bringing up how all of our boyfriends and our guy friends were in the room waiting on us, and how there were like 10 people staying there. When the elevator hit our floor, we took off running as fast as we could. 2 weeks later, after we came home, there was a news story about the same security guard. He followed a girl onto the elevator and made her perform sexual favors before he'd let her go. Edit. Found the article about it. He didn't rape her. It was almost 6 years ago. He locked 3 girls in the elevator with him and tried to touch their boobs and threatened to evict them. 2 were minors. He was arrested for false imprisonment. Story 8. When I used to go to college, I had to cut through a particular cemetery, the one attached to this church. The lack of space meant very few people had been buried there since the 1900s. Anyway, under this one tree was the grave of a very young girl, just on its own. Said her name and the date she died, 1885, age 12. I don't know why, but I always got a solemn feeling as I walked past that grave, every single day. Eventually it consumed me. I had no idea why I was getting that feeling walking past the grave, so I googled her name. Within about a week, I had found out who she was and why she was buried there. She was buried there after suffering from a lung complaint. According to the family Bible, she died most peaceably in her mother's arms. Shortly after she died, her family left Brighton and found a private school close to London. From what I can tell, the family never once returned to Brighton to visit her grave. I worked with a family biographer for a while, digging up as much as we could about this girl, because he had barely heard of her, save the death certificate and the mention in the family Bible. It is like they erased her from the last 50 years of their life. After a while, the trail went cold. I still had thoughts of how sad it was that this girl never had her family visit her after she died. And once again, those thoughts consumed me. I fell asleep one night and dreamt of her and her dad. She told me she was fine now. I never dreamt of her once after that point. The uneasy feeling went as I walked past her grave. A couple of months later, the guy I was working with emailed me a picture. He had found a photograph of her. The problem? It was death photography. Because that is what they did in the day and age, as it was too expensive to regularly hire a photographer. So the only existing picture of her is from the day she died. The kicker? The girl in that photograph looked exactly like the girl that I saw in my dream, the one that told me she was fine now. Up until I left England, I left flowers by her grave. This was the only grave in the whole cemetery which ever had flowers on it. My friends do it to this day, because nobody deserves to be forgotten, even in death. Story 9. I've been waiting a long time to tell Reddit the full story of the Whistler. This story requires many details, but it is unexplainable, creepy, and 100% true. I also have video evidence. When I was about 8 years old, I was taking my dog for a walk through the neighborhood with my mom. It was maybe 11 p.m. We lived next to a swamp or woods area on the edge of our neighborhood in Lansing, Michigan. I remember it being very silent and slightly windy. From down in the swamp, we heard somebody whistling at us. It sounded sort of like a bird, but each whistle was different enough that the lack of consistency made it human-like. The whistle sounded higher, then lower. I can't really describe it. My mom had a concerned, slightly terrified look on her face and grabbed my hand and said that we should go inside quickly. I didn't understand because I was too young, but seeing my mom freak out made me freak out too. After a while though, I kind of forgot about it. 2 years later, I was taking my dog out again, late at night. There's a large bush that could easily obscure a person behind it just next to the front door. As I was finishing the walk, the whistling noise started again. Same pitches, the same inconsistent, human-like tones. As soon as I heard it, a chill went down my spine as I remembered exactly the feeling of seeing my mom, terrified, looking down into the swamp at something I couldn't see. Maybe she couldn't either. I ran inside as fast as possible. Years went by and I thought about it less and less. I told only a handful of people and eventually it slipped from my mind. Fast forward to last summer. I'm 24, started dating my girl Sarah. We moved out to South Dakota for work. For Independence Day, we decided to go to Pier and watch the fireworks along the bank of the Missouri River. There was a free camping spot behind a hospital where you could pitch your tent, hang out, and see the fireworks up the river. We were near the end of the campground and there were very few people around us. As it was getting dark, the fireworks began. They were pretty far away, so the illumination they brought was very little. Thus, we had to sit right at the edge of the river to be able to see them. A huge thunderhead was moving in and a storm was imminent, so the air seemed electric and the wind was picking up. The atmosphere was eerie, to say the least. The police boats herded all the other boats off the river and left our area to do that elsewhere. Most of the other campers walked up to the river to have a better view of the fireworks, but Sarah and I stayed back and were drinking tall boys and kicking it. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a paddle methodically dipping into the water. We saw a figure, steering a canoe about 20 meters offshore. Sarah decided to go get more beers from the car, leaving me alone to stare at this mystery person. And then, of course, they whistled at me. My entire body was frozen and covered in goosebumps. It was the exact same whistler from my childhood, more than a decade earlier. I looked at the figure, but it was much too dark to discern who it could be. They were wearing a hat. When they were perpendicular to the shore from me, they stopped paddling, turned the canoe to face directly at me, and whistled right at me. I was so frightened I stood up and shouted at them, "Who are you?" They didn't say anything, just whistled a couple more times, turned the canoe 180 degrees, and paddled out of sight. I'm a videographer, so I already had my camera by my side and was taking video of the fireworks. As the canoe was almost out of sight, I grabbed my camera and got a shot of them whistling as they went away. When Sarah came back from getting beers, she was very confused as to why I was so freaked out. When I explained, she was freaked out a bit too. I was convinced we would both be murdered that night. How did this whistling person follow me after 14 years, all the way to South Dakota? Was it a coincidence? Why was it the same whistling noise? Who was that person and where did they go? So many questions still unanswered. To this day, I'm more afraid of being outside in the dark where I might hear that whistling again. I'm open to any explanations. If there is interest, I will find a plug and edit a little video of the fireworks and the whistling noise, and the canoe disappearing. I'm in Uganda currently and the internet is spotty where I am, so I'll do my best. Edit. Okay, finally. I spent all afternoon uploading this video. Here's the link. When I was still getting shots of the fireworks, I heard the whistling starts. I was too afraid at the moment to point the camera directly at the canoe, so I just turned my microphone towards it and kept a low-key shot facing downriver toward the fireworks. If you wear headphones, you can hear it better. It's the two-note whistle, high then low. You can hear me ask my girlfriend, "Are you whistling? Is that you?" She said no, but I wasn't sure, so I told her, "Stop it," because I was getting scared. The last shot, I boosted the brightness as much as I could and still make out the person in the canoe. It looks like they're wearing a red sweater or something. Edit 2. It's been a while, and I apologize for that. I'm back in the US now and I asked my mom about it. I sat her down and played the video for her. She honestly doesn't remember anything like that happening. I wish I had something more exciting to say. Alas, it must remain a mystery. Dude, I shit you not. In my country, there's a legend about a guy called El Silbón, the Whistler, a sort of damned soul that warns people of their coming death. Story 10. I work in a pub. It's about 2 miles away in the next village. I usually finish work late, 1 to 2 a.m., and have to cycle home. The only route is a small road that goes through somewhat large woods. There's a 1-mile stretch that has absolutely no streetlights. It's pitch black. As I was cycling through the woods, I start hearing the screeching sound, similar to a small animal dying. It scared the shit out of me, so I started pedaling fast. I continued to hear it, and it seemed as if it was progressing toward me. I used my phone's camera light to navigate, although it isn't impossible to see without it. I point my phone behind me and I swear I caught sight of some fucking humanoid creature on all fours running at me. Call it mind games, but this was pretty vivid. I continue to cycle as fast as I can. I've been cycling long distances from a young age. I'd like to say I'm quite fast. Yet I continue to hear the screeching and the light padding of the footsteps of whatever is chasing me. I try to turn my phone light off, and after a few seconds, I manage to do so. The padding becomes quieter, and I hear one last screech from whatever it was. I've never been so scared in all my life. Edit. Okay, I've called up the pub manager for some more work. He asked me in for a shift tonight. I'll take pictures tonight. They'll be posted when this post is about 13 hours old. I'll let you guys know what happens on my way back. Edit. Just leaving now. Wish me luck. Edit. I said I'd deliver. Well, f*** me. I took some pictures of my cycle home to try and verify the story as much as possible. I'm pretty shaken at the moment, as I'll explain below. So on my way home, I was absolutely shitting myself. As it's the only reasonable route home, I had to do it, and sooner than later. So here I was, beginning the long journey home. As I went further in, it opens up to a connecting road which is quite open, although it has woods either side. I very rarely see cars on this road, and I don't recall seeing any at nighttime. After cycling for a few minutes, I heard the same scream I heard a month back. I was fucking scared. The first time wasn't just some stupid coincidence. It sounded far away and didn't seem as though it was directed toward me. I kept my light off this time, except for taking pictures. I assumed whatever it was didn't see me, but I began to fucking pump it home. This is when it gets bad. Throughout the forest in all directions, I heard what must have been at least 10 other screams, all sounding exactly the same, all in harmony. I honestly thought that was it. I thought I was dead any second. So fucking happy to be home, and I fucking delivered. I don't know what this is, but I don't want to fuck with them. I have some images I took while cycling away, after hearing the screeches. If anyone is able to brighten them and find any evidence, please do. Are woods of deer and foxes, no mountain lions or boars. I know what they both sound like. My house has a lot of wooded land surrounding it. They sound nothing like what I heard. I can still hear it, ringing in my head. I'm so fucking scared I don't know what to do. If anyone wants to investigate this, please PM me. Story 11. I was 16 and living in Chicago in the infamous South Shore neighborhood. We lived in a basement apartment, aka a garden apartment. My mom was sick and was begging me to go to the store a block away to get an Arizona iced tea for her. She gave me the money and I left no problems. The owner of the store knew me and my mom and would watch out for me. Plus, I knew how to handle myself if things got violent. Well, this man, I'm guessing somewhere between 25 to 30, begins following me at the corner of my house. I try to brush it off and hurry to the store. He comes in and follows me through the aisles. Eventually, as I'm grabbing the drink from the fridge, he offers to buy it for me. I refused, telling him I can do it on my own. He doubles down and offers me $60 in food stamps on the condition I have sex with him in his car outside. If you don't know the street currency, that's 30 USD cash. I refuse, tell him I'm only 16 years old, thinking it would scare him off. He then offers me $100 in food stamps. I tell him there was no way and make sure to chat up the store owner and ask him to call my mom for me, to tell her I got what you wanted. That way this guy would know that the owner knew me and that someone was home with me. Rushed home and told my mom about the interaction and she didn't send me out alone anymore. That should be the end of it, right? Well, jump to a week later. I'm in bed and burning hot. Normally I take off my clothes and head back to bed. This time something felt off. I turn on the bedside lamp and I see the same man laying on his side looking through the tiny basement windows right at me. He was jerking himself off. I screamed. My mom ran into my room as he was getting up to run off. Thankfully, my mom was fed up with the place anyways, and we moved the next week into a hotel while we searched for a new apartment. Definitely scary. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is the most disturbing, disgusting, scariest thing I've ever heard. What a piece of shit. I'm glad you're okay. Story 12. It was pretty early in the morning and I heard some weird noise downstairs. My wife was out of town with her mom, so just me and the cats in the house. They were both in the bed with me and also looked kind of freaked out. So I get up slowly and hear another loud crash, glass breaking type noise. I didn't own a gun or anything at the time, so I was looking around for some sort of weapon, which ended up being this brass vase thing I kept changing. I grabbed that and creeped downstairs, slightly freaking out. More noises. Then a noise. Turns out I left the back door wide open and my goat wandered into the kitchen and shit everywhere and broke a shelf. I yelled at the goat and he went back outside. Story 13. About 6 months ago, I was home alone and I get a knock on the front door. Now, I'm always cautious of people at the front door because my front door is set back on the side of my house out of view. There were two large security-looking men in big black suits and greasy hair. They asked as they peered around me, "Do you live here alone?" I said no, pretending I had a husband or something. Then they asked, "Does your dog bite? And is your house secure?" Then I asked where they were from again, and with one last look around me through to the house, they said, "We'll come back later. Maybe you'll be more cooperative." Now, it doesn't sound scary, but home alone at 23, this still freaked me out. This frightened me for weeks. I immediately went to the neighbors thinking they had spoken to these men as well. My neighbor said no, she hadn't, but she assumed they were friends of mine as their car was in my driveway almost every day this week. I worked during the day. I called the cops and felt sort of silly, but basically wanted them to know that if I turn up dead, I know who did it. They took it very seriously. And after a squad car was sent out, I got a call later that evening. They said men matching the description were persons interested in a break-and-enter raid near Tea Tree Plaza, Adelaide. They sent a car out to see me and did regular checks for the next 3 nights. Still, I can't wait to move. 3 more months and I'll be out of this house away from whoever those men were. With all of the stories you usually hear, It's nice to see one where the cops did their jobs. Story 14. I worked as a park ranger for a few summers. It was a great job, but the downside was dealing with the public. I have tons of crazy stories, but only one extremely creepy story. I was scheduled to close the park one night with another girl. The park opened at dawn and closed at dusk. The closing duties were to drive around and make sure everyone was out of the park and close the gates. You had to make sure everyone was out or else they would get locked inside. Kristen and I got into a truck together to check the day-use picnic area, both campgrounds and all bathrooms. When we left the upper lot, there were no cars in the parking lot of the ranger station. Important later. We cruised around and checked all areas. All was good, so we drove back up to the gate and ranger station to close up. I got out to close the gate and jumped back into the truck. Kristen pointed out that while we were gone, a Jeep had parked in the parking lot. We thought this was super weird since we hadn't seen anyone park there earlier. But whatever. We parked the truck a couple of spots away from the Jeep and got out. I figured we'd just tell the person to leave and then we could go home. As we approached the vehicle, we could barely see someone sitting in the driver's seat. We had dim street lamps, so we knew someone was in there. I waved and got no response. No movement. Kristen knocked on the window, but the person didn't respond. We both started feeling like something was wrong. I got chills standing there and we both stepped away from the Jeep, alarmed at the lack of response. We both decided to get our boss, who lived across the street, on site. We weren't supposed to bother him at night, but this was too weird. He got his shoes on and walked over with us. As we were crossing the street, we saw the door to the Jeep slowly open. Then all three of us saw a figure creep out of the vehicle and crawl underneath. All we saw was a shadow since there wasn't a lot of light. All of us were scared shitless. It was something out of a horror movie. Kristen got on the phone with the police while my boss and I slowly approached the vehicle. My boss told the person they needed to leave and that we were calling the cops. We could see someone sitting under the lifted Jeep, near the front tires. The person wasn't moving or responding. Once the police showed up, they were visibly freaked out too. They had guns drawn and everything. It turned out to be some person tripping on meth. We had no idea why they showed up at the park or what they were doing there, but the cops did find drugs and a loaded gun in the vehicle. After that night, my boss changed all policies regarding closing duties. He added extra closers and we had to carry mace. It was truly terrifying to witness someone creep out of their car and scramble like an animal underneath. It was like she was possessed.